Hello and welcome back to Retfurb. So on today's video I've got this saddle which is made by X-Lite and it's the Kevlar Titanium seat. As you can see, it's not in the best conditions. It's got a really bad crack underneath. Now it hasn't gone from side to side, it's sort of cracked across the middle of that section of the seat, but it hasn't gone right to the edges, which makes it a little bit better because it's got a bit of support. So getting straight into it, what we're going to do is we're going to strip all the old covering off, we're going to replace that, we're going to repair the crack, and then they're going to use a Kevlar material to go over the top, which is a slightly different design than this plain blue. Now, originally I think they came in blue, red and possibly yellow. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure that they did a yellow as well. But I've got some Kevlar material, which is like a square patterned material, which you'll see shortly. So now I'm just showing the extent of the crack, which has gone all the way through. But like I say, it doesn't go right to the edges. So first of all, I'm just going to heat the bottom of the seat and then just form that back a little bit. It sort of bent it slightly out of shape with that crack there. So I'm just going to warm it up and then hold it back into shape to where it should be. And then we can look at using the plastic welder and welding that back together. So you can see here, this is a plastic welding gun that I've got. This was purchased from Amazon. It wasn't very expensive. I think it was like 20 quid, something like that, maybe a little bit more. So I'm just going to use the end that goes in there, which I'm just going to melt the plastic and weld that together first before putting some hot staples in there and just welding it together as best as I can until I put those staples in. So you can see just heating it and just melting the two sections either side of the crack together just to give it a little bit of a brace before the staples go in there. Now some plastics you'll find when you try to repair it and melt the plastic, it won't work properly. There's only certain plastics that do it. I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head which plastics it is, but you'll soon know as soon as you start melting it. Some burn and go almost like grainy, whereas these burn and go more like a molten plastic and then harden again back into the solid plastic that you can see underneath the seat. So now I'm just putting the hot staples back in. So these are just sort of like a wiggly wire which get pushed in with the heat, and then you sort of twist them slightly as you get them in there, and then it leaves two legs which just need to be snipped off flush with the plastic. As you can see, it's nice and simple, just like that. So now I'm just going to do a bit of a close-up and just show you a closer up of the process of putting these staples in there. So again, just heating it up with the gun, and then as it goes in, I sort of give it a little twist into the plastic. So by doing this, I'm probably going to put about 8 staples in there, I think it was off the top of my head. And it'll just, you know, form a good strong joint between both sides of the crack, and it should be just as strong as it was before, as long as I get it melted correctly. And then afterwards I'm going to go over again and just melt a little bit over the top with the first tool that I used with this hot stapler, and just melt the plastic over the top of the staples again. But first just proceeding to put more staples in, just making sure that crack's bridged either side. So I actually purchased this seat a while back and I didn't realise it had a crack in it. Had I realised it was cracked, I might not have bought it, but you know, it's not really bad, it's repairable. Some people probably would have just thrown it out, but I definitely think it's worth repairing. It's a decent seat, and doing this, like I say, should form a nice strong joint again. So you can see there, that's it all repaired, and I'm flexing it and there's no movement between the joint. It's just the same as the other side pretty much, maybe a little bit weaker, but it's, you know, it's definitely usable as it is. So now I'm going to put the covering on. So the first thing to do is just cover the main part of the seat with some aerosol adhesive. So this is an impact adhesive, so you just spray it on, let it tack off for a short period, and then do exactly the same with the covering. So now this covering, this is the Kevlar covering. So it's obviously not the original finish, but I thought it would give it quite a good look, and I thought it would be a little bit sort of 80s looking. So again with this, just spraying the aerosol contact adhesive on the underside, and then making sure you line up the seat as you put it on, trying to get those squares central. The only problem I have with this material is it only forms in one horizontal direction. So one horizontal direction it is rigid, and then the other way it will form. So the only problem while you're doing that is, as you can see, as you're pulling it one way rather than always. So it did slightly pull off the lines, the square lines, trying to keep a more square of the seat. So when you see it, it are slightly off. It isn't really bad, but it is slightly off. So that's just something to bear in mind when you're using material which doesn't form in all ways. You know, if you've got a nice flexible material that you can stretch in all directions, it makes life a hell of a lot easier. Obviously with this one it didn't, it only stretched a certain way, so it made it a little bit more difficult, but I'm happy with it. You know, I think it came out well. You'll see at the end, I think it came out really well by the end of it. I did try using a canvasy type material before I used this material, which was a red canvas material, which was very similar to the original type finish on the blue finish. Obviously it wasn't Kevlar, but it just had hardly any give in it. I warmed it, which did help, and maybe I didn't give it enough time to try and do it, but I couldn't form it enough to get rid of all the creases at the back. There was just creases that I couldn't get out. Now, like I say, I might not have sort of done it long enough and heated it up enough. I might have been able to do it. I might give it another go, to be honest, just to see whether I can. I don't like to be defeated by it, but it was just, yeah, it wasn't great. And I thought with this one, at least it's a Kevlar seat originally with the covering, so at least this is Kevlar going back on there. Even though it doesn't look the same colour, it's still Kevlar. So you can see I'm just forming the nose. This tends to be the hardest point when you're doing any sort of seat recovering, because it's the tightest point on the seat. This and the back corners are always quite difficult, so they just take a bit of time to just keep forming around and just getting that tucked in and making sure that it's stuck down. And the outside should be free of wrinkles. You know, you might get slight little wrinkles on the outside, very minor ones, but you know, they should be more or less gone. And I'm just using the scissors just to cut little incisions either side, not all the way to the actual base, just enough just to help it form around the shape of underneath. If I was doing it with real leather, then you wouldn't really have to do that because it forms a lot better, it's a lot more stretchable. And as I say on all my videos, it's best not to use a sharp object trying to push this round the rails, and every time I do it with a screwdriver, not learning my lesson. It's the closest thing I had on hand and decided to use that again, but it's not recommended. It's best to use like a plastic sort of tool that you can use just to push it in the sides, just something which is not so sharp that it can potentially damage the covering. This covering is pretty strong, to be honest. Obviously being Kevlar, it is pretty strong. But yeah, I still wouldn't recommend doing it. It's just me being stupid. So yeah, just working around, making sure that's all stuck. Obviously when you put more glue on the material, which you can do throughout the whole process, and you will need to do, you need to make sure that it tacks off in between. It won't stick straight away if you try to spray the glue on and then put it on straight away. It won't stick down, so you need to give it a little bit of a tack off time, and then you can start forming it around. You could start doing it beforehand, but it makes it a lot messier, and especially when you've got material which is porous like this. If you start doing it and pushing it around, you'll find that it starts coming through the material and then it'll pretty much wreck it. So you need to let it tack off a little bit so you don't get that. And just trimming off any excess as I'm tucking it in behind the back of the seat. So I'm almost coming to the end of the actual recovering process. As you can see, it's gone pretty well. Not, you know, not the best covering I've done, but yeah, it's pretty good. I'm pretty happy with how it's come out. There's some sort of really small wrinkles at the back of the seat, but nothing compared to the canvas material that I was trying to do previously. This one's formed a hell of a lot better, but obviously it only forms one way, like I was saying, horizontally, and it just makes it a lot more harder to form. But yeah, looking at it, you can see it's come out pretty well. You know, first impressions, just a quick look at it, you wouldn't notice that the squares are slightly off. this is when you notice it more when you come to put the decals on, because the decals lining up with the seat, you can see that it's ever so slightly off. Now I know I keep mentioning it and it sounds a lot worse than it is, but it's just something to bear in mind when you're doing any sort of pattern on a seat. It's easier when you've got one flat colour because you don't get any issues like that. So I've cut these heat press decals and I'm just sticking them down onto the seat. So just using iron with some greaseproof paper just to act as a barrier so you don't burn anything, and then just pressing down on top. Normally you would use this heat press vinyl in a heat press, but you can't obviously do that with a seat, so you need to sort of go over it, just make sure you sort of do little by little, just seeing if it's taken, if it hasn't, sticking it back down, going over it again. It's best to do it that way rather than going too mad and then potentially damaging something when you do it. Ordinarily in a heat press it's about 15 seconds roughly you press it. Let's say you were doing a t-shirt for instance, yeah, you'd do it for about 15 seconds and then that should be pressed nice and tight. Leather's always a difficult one to do because some leathers you get sort of oils coming out of it and it doesn't stick so well, so it almost takes a few times to do it and then eventually it will stick pretty well. When it's material like this it tends to stick quite well. So this has to be done in stages because it's just solid heat press vinyl. So do the white and then you go over and do the black on top of it, which is no big deal. You just got to make sure as you're doing it you're lining it up correctly. And you can see as I'm doing that little bits are coming up, so that just needs to be sort of gone over the top again with the iron. So now coming to the final stage of doing the heat press vinyl on the seat. And that's it, all done. As you can see it's come out really well, I'm really happy with it. I think you agree it's given it quite a retro sort of look with the squares on it. Obviously not original like I said before, but it's a Kevlar material which the seat is. It's had the repair on the base which is formed a nice solid base for the seat again, and the recovering and obviously the heat press vinyls at the end. So yeah, really happy with it. Let me know what you think. Thanks for taking the time to watch the video, it's really appreciated. Please like and subscribe and we'll see you in the next one.